Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
Have you ever been called selfish by the very people who take everything from you, as if your entire existence is meant to serve them without hesitation or expectation of gratitude? That was the story of my life, a carefully crafted role I never auditioned for but played flawlessly, year after year, because it was easier than fighting against the current of family expectations. My mother, Carol, had always made it clear that there were two kinds of people in this world: those who deserved everything simply by existing, and those who were expected to give without question. My younger sister, Lauren, had been born into the first category, wrapped in an invisible crown she never had to earn, while I had been shoved into the second, carrying a responsibility I never asked for but could never escape. I had spent my entire life being the responsible one, the fixer, the problem solver, the person who kept everything from completely falling apart when my mother or my sister made reckless decisions. It had started small when we were kids, Lauren breaking a vase and blaming me, my mother not even hesitating before grounding me for it. Then it grew as we got older, Lauren failing a class, and I was the one forced to tutor her all summer. She crashed my first car, and my parents took money from my college fund to buy her a new one, leaving me to take out loans while she was gifted every advantage. It had always been like that, an unspoken agreement that my needs would come second, or third, or not at all, because Lauren always had to come first. Still, despite it all, I never stopped loving my sister. It wasn't her fault that she had been spoiled, not really. She had been raised to believe the world would always bend to her needs, and in our family it always had. But I knew better. I knew that when things got bad, when real consequences started piling up, someone had to be the adult, and it was never going to be Lauren. So when her son, Tyler, got sick, I didn't hesitate. Tyler had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disease that required expensive treatments, multiple hospital visits, and round-the-clock care. Lauren, of course, was overwhelmed. Her husband, James, did what he could, but he wasn't exactly dependable. He worked sporadically, spent money recklessly, and had a bad habit of disappearing when things got too stressful. My mother, in typical fashion, acted like the weight of the situation was something she was carrying personally, despite doing absolutely nothing to help. And Lauren, as much as she loved her son, wasn't built to handle this kind of crisis alone. I could see it in her voice when she called me late at night, exhausted and desperate, barely holding it together as she whispered about how much everything was costing, how the bills were stacking up, how the insurance wouldn't cover half of what they needed. She never outright asked me for money, but she didn't have to. I had always been the one to step up, always been the one to fill in the gaps when no one else would. So, without telling anyone, I called the hospital and paid off $10,000 worth of medical bills, ensuring Tyler's treatments would continue without interruption. It wasn't even a question in my mind. He was my nephew, and I loved him. If I had to drain my savings account to make sure he was okay, then that was just what I would do. I never told Lauren. I didn't need to. It wasn't about recognition or gratitude, and honestly, I didn't expect either. It was just about doing the right thing, about making sure Tyler had a chance. Life had already dealt him an unfair hand, and I wasn't about to let money be the reason he suffered more than he had to. A few weeks later, Lauren called me with a different tone in her voice. She sounded lighter, relieved, like a burden had been lifted, and for once, it wasn't because I had to carry it for her. She was planning Tyler's baptism, and she wanted me to be his godmother. For a second, I was stunned, because despite everything, despite knowing that I had always been the one holding her up, I had never expected her to acknowledge it in any real way. I had spent years watching her turn to others for emotional validation, to friends who never lasted, to boyfriends who treated her like an afterthought, to our mother, who coddled her but never actually supported her. And now, she was choosing me, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. It felt like, for once, she actually saw me. Not as the backup plan, not as the fixer, not as the safety net, but as someone she trusted, someone she valued, someone she wanted in her child's life as a guiding presence. I swallowed the lump in my throat and told her I would be honored, because despite everything, despite all the ways our family had made me feel invisible, this was something real. This was something that mattered. For the first time in my life, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, things were changing. Maybe Lauren was finally growing up. Maybe my mother would finally see me as more than just the convenient fallback. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't just the responsible one. Maybe I was finally something more. I had no idea just how wrong I was. The night of the family dinner arrived, and I walked in with something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope that, for once, I would be more than just the responsible one, the one who was always expected to do everything without complaint, but never acknowledged for it. The restaurant was nice, too nice for what Lauren and James could afford, which told me immediately that my mother had footed the bill, as she always did when it came to anything involving my sister. The place had soft lighting, expensive-looking silverware, and a wine list that I knew my mother would order from excessively, already acting as if this dinner was some kind of personal celebration of her own. Lauren greeted me with a big hug, her voice warm and full of something that almost felt like gratitude, and for a brief moment, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, things were different this time. James gave me a nod from across the table, barely looking up from his phone, and my mother, already halfway through a glass of wine, offered me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, the way she always did when she had something to say that she knew I wouldn't like. I sat down, carefully placing my napkin in my lap, forcing myself to relax, because for once, I wasn't here to fix anything. I was here because my sister wanted me to be. I was here because she had chosen me. Dinner went smoothly at first, with small talk about Tyler and how well he was doing now that the hospital bills weren't hanging over their heads like a dark cloud. Lauren laughed about how much energy he had, how he was already crawling faster than she could keep up, and for a brief moment, it felt like everything was falling into place. Then, as the waiter cleared away our plates and my mother swirled the last of her wine in her glass, she leaned forward with the kind of smug satisfaction that always preceded something cruel. "Well, Lauren," she said, dabbing at the corner of her mouth with her napkin, "since you're making your big announcement tonight, why don't you just say it?" Lauren smiled, practically glowing, and I braced myself, though I wasn't sure why. This was supposed to be a good moment, something I had looked forward to since she first asked me. She took a deep breath, glancing at James, who nodded encouragingly, before finally turning back to me with a look that sent something uneasy twisting in my stomach. "I've finally decided who Tyler's godmother is going to be," she said, her voice light, excited, like she was expecting applause, like this was supposed to be some grand reveal that everyone would cheer for. I smiled, ready to accept the title that she had already promised me, the role I had already let myself believe was mine, the position that, for the first time in my life, felt like a real acknowledgement of everything I had done for her. But before I could even open my mouth to say anything, she continued, and the words that left her lips made my entire body go cold. "I'm choosing Megan," she said, beaming. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. Megan. Not me. Megan, her best friend from college, the one who never stuck around long enough to handle anything remotely difficult, the one who had never done a single thing for her or for Tyler, the one who had never shown up at the hospital, never offered help, never been there when things were falling apart. I blinked, my brain scrambling to process what I had just heard, and all I could do was ask, "What?" Lauren's smile faltered just slightly, but before she could answer, my mother jumped in with the kind of sickeningly sweet voice she always used when she was about to cut me down in the worst way possible. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, tilting her head like she actually pitied me. "You didn't actually think it would be you, did you?" I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting as Lauren shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but she didn't say anything, didn't correct her, didn't fight for me, didn't remind our mother that she had already promised me this, that she had already told me I was the one. She just sat there, silent, while my mother twisted the knife deeper. "You're too selfish to be a godparent," my mother said, sighing like this was something obvious, something we had all known forever. You always make everything about you, and that's just not the kind of person Lauren needs in Tyler's life. I felt my heart stop for just a second, a sharp, hollow pain settling deep in my chest, because for the first time in a long time, I had let myself believe that maybe I was more than just the one they took from. The one they expected everything from but never gave anything back to. I had let myself believe that Lauren had finally seen me, finally appreciated me, finally valued me. And now, sitting at this table, listening to my mother say those words, watching Lauren do nothing to defend me, I realized just how much of a fool I had been. I could have fought back, could have demanded an explanation, could have reminded them of everything I had done, could have told them about the $10,000 I had quietly paid to keep Tyler alive, but I didn't. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I just nodded slowly, pressing my lips together to keep them from trembling, before setting down my napkin, standing up, and walking away from the table without a word. That night, when I got home, I sat on my couch in the dark, staring at my bank statement, at the payment I had made to the hospital, at the money that had drained my savings, that had cost me so much, all for a family that had never once appreciated anything I had done for them. And then, without hesitation, without a second thought, without an ounce of guilt, I picked up my phone, called the hospital, and told them to reverse the payment. I didn't owe them anything. Not anymore. The next morning, as I drank my coffee, my phone rang, Lauren's name lighting up the screen. I let it ring, let it go to voicemail, let the weight of what I had done settle deep in my chest. Because this time, for once in my life, I wasn't going to fix it. The ringing of my phone shattered the quiet stillness of the morning, pulling me out of the light sleep I had finally managed to slip into after hours of restless turning, my mind replaying every word from last night's dinner over and over like a broken record. The sun had barely begun to rise, soft rays slipping through the curtains, casting long shadows across my bedroom as I reached for my phone without even looking at the screen, already knowing who it would be before I even answered. The second I picked up, before I could even get a word out, Lauren's voice exploded through the speaker, frantic and on the verge of hysteria, her breath hitching between words like she had been crying for a while already. "Why would you do this to us?" she sobbed, her voice cracking in a way that might have made me feel guilty if I hadn't spent the last 24 hours reminding myself that I didn't owe her anything anymore. "The hospital just called. Emily, they're saying we owe 10 grand, and if we don't pay, Tyler's treatments could be delayed." What the hell happened? I didn't react right away, letting the words settle in the air between us, letting her panic grow as the silence stretched, waiting for the weight of the situation to really sink in before I finally spoke. I could picture her in my head, pacing back and forth in her messy kitchen, her free hand probably tugging at her hair the way she always did when she was overwhelmed, her entire body thrumming with barely controlled desperation. It was a scene I had witnessed 1,000 times before, but this time, for the first time, I wasn't the one who was going to clean up the mess. "I just made sure I wasn't being too selfish," I said simply, my voice calm, steady, void of the emotion she was probably expecting, because I had nothing left to give. The silence that followed was deafening, stretching between us like an unspoken truth that neither of us had ever acknowledged until this exact moment. For the first time, Lauren had no words, no immediate way to spin the situation, no quick fix that involved me swooping in to take responsibility for something she had never planned on dealing with herself. "Emily," she whispered finally, her voice small, fragile, like she had just realized something about me that had never occurred to her before, something she had never even considered because she had never needed to. "Please tell me you didn't." I didn't answer right away, letting the weight of what I had done settle deep in my bones, letting her sit with the knowledge that, for once, I had taken something back for myself. And then, with a quiet exhale, I gave her the truth she wasn't ready to hear. "I did," I said, my voice unwavering. "And I don't regret it." The sharp inhale on the other end of the line was followed by a choked sob, a sound that might have made me feel something if I hadn't spent years swallowing down my own pain every time she had taken from me without a second thought. "You don't understand," she whimpered, her voice breaking apart like shattered glass. "We don't have that kind of money, Emily. We can't afford this. We're already drowning, and now you have to deal with it yourselves." I finished for her, my tone not unkind, but firm, resolute. The way I should have spoken to her years ago instead of constantly bending to her every crisis. "You should call Megan," I added after a moment, my lips curling into something that might have been a smile if I hadn't been so exhausted by all of this. After all, she's the godmother. I'm sure she'd be more than happy to step up. The silence that followed was so thick it felt like it had weight, pressing against my chest like an anchor, the final, undeniable confirmation that Lauren had never expected anything from Megan because Megan had never been the one keeping her life from falling apart. That had always been me, and now, with one simple action, I had forced her to see it. A sharp rustling sound came through the phone, followed by the muffled sound of my mother's voice in the background, and I knew then that Lauren had run straight to her, passing the problem along the way she always did, never taking responsibility for anything unless she absolutely had to. Within seconds, the phone was snatched away, and my mother's sharp, clipped tone replaced Lauren's broken sobs, filled with the kind of anger she reserved only for me. "Fix this," she snapped, wasting no time with pleasantries, because she had never needed to pretend with me, had never needed to soften her words the way she did with Lauren. "I don't care what kind of point you're trying to make, Emily, but you are not going to let your nephew suffer just because you want to throw a tantrum." The words should have hurt, should have stung the way they always had when I was a child, but now, after everything, they just felt hollow. Another tired attempt to manipulate me into submission, another demand that I was no longer willing to meet. "I already did fix it," I said, my voice void of anything that could be mistaken for regret. "I fixed it by making sure the person you love so much more than me gets to deal with the consequences of her own choices for once." My mother's breath hitched, a momentary pause before she let out a sharp, humorless laugh, the kind that always preceded something cruel, something meant to cut deep enough to make me fold. "You're going to regret this," she said, her voice low, simmering with barely contained rage. "I promise you, Emily, you will regret this." But as I stood there, staring at the early morning light filtering through my window, the weight of my entire childhood pressing down on my shoulders, but failing to break me the way it always had before, I realized something for the first time in my life. I didn't regret it at all. The air inside the restaurant was thick with the forced politeness of extended family gatherings, a suffocating blend of fake smiles, clinking glasses, and carefully measured small talk that barely concealed the tension simmering beneath the surface. I had arrived late on purpose, taking my time getting ready, knowing full well that this wasn't just another casual family event, but an ambush disguised as a dinner, another carefully orchestrated moment where I was expected to fall in line, apologize for things that weren't my fault, and clean up the messes of people who never once appreciated the sacrifices I had made for them. Lauren and my mother had wasted no time in calling this little get-together under the pretense of clearing the air, a phrase I had heard too many times before, always used when they had done something cruel and wanted me to pretend it hadn't happened. I had spent my entire life being dragged into these performances, playing the role of the dutiful daughter, the responsible sister, the one who was always supposed to be bigger, to be kinder, to be the one who put the family first no matter how many times they made me feel like I wasn't really part of it. But this time, things were different, because I had finally drawn a line, and they didn't know how to handle it. The second I stepped through the door, I saw them, Lauren and my mother sitting side by side at the long, polished dining table, their expressions perfectly rehearsed, their spines stiff with the anticipation of confrontation. Around them, other family members sat awkwardly, shifting in their seats, pretending they didn't know exactly what was about to happen, pretending they weren't waiting for the inevitable explosion that always came when my mother decided I needed to be put back in my place. My father sat at the far end of the table, his hands folded in front of him, his face unreadable, as it always was when it came to the battles between my mother and me. Lauren was the first to speak, her voice carefully measured, a little too light, as if she were trying to keep herself from breaking down before she even got through the first sentence. "Emily," she started, taking a deep breath as if she were the one carrying some unbearable weight, "we need to talk about what you did." I didn't sit down. I didn't make myself comfortable the way they expected me to, didn't offer them any indication that I was here to smooth things over. Instead, I folded my arms across my chest, tilting my head slightly as I met her gaze, unflinching, unbothered, waiting for her to finally say what she had come here to say. "You mean canceling the hospital payment?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, almost casual, as if the weight of their anger didn't press against my skin like a slow-burning fire. "Or do you mean choosing not to let you walk all over me for the millionth time?" My mother scoffed, setting her wine glass down with an audible clink, her fingers tightening around the stem like she was physically restraining herself from slapping the smug expression off my face. "You're acting like some kind of victim here, Emily," she said, her voice carrying the same exasperated condescension she had always used when I was younger, the same tone she had perfected after years of making me feel like I was never enough. "But what you did was cruel and unnecessary. You put Tyler's health at risk just to prove a point, and quite frankly, I'm disgusted." The words might have landed harder if I hadn't spent my entire childhood being conditioned to believe that my mother's disappointment was the worst thing I could endure. But I had spent years being made to feel like I was selfish every time I put my own needs first, and this time, I wasn't going to let them rewrite the story to make me the villain. I laughed, the sound hollow and sharp, the kind of laugh that made people shift uncomfortably in their seats, because they knew something was coming, something they hadn't expected, something that would make it impossible for them to keep pretending that I was the problem. "I was never the selfish one, Mom," I said, my voice steady, unwavering, as I stared directly at her. "You just hated that I didn't let you use me." The room fell into a stunned silence, the weight of my words hanging thick in the air, wrapping around everyone at the table like an unforgiving fog that no one could escape. For the first time in my life, my mother looked like she didn't know what to say, her mouth opening slightly, her jaw tightening, her fingers curling into fists on the table as she tried to formulate a response that would put me back in my place. But there was nothing she could say, no manipulative retort that would make what I had just said any less true. Lauren's lip trembled as she glanced between my mother and me, clearly struggling to find the right thing to say, to reach for the version of this conversation where I backed down and fixed everything for her like I always did. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, her voice small, weak, cracking under the weight of her own guilt. I thought you'd always be there, you know? You always fix everything, Emily. You always—" "I know," I interrupted, shaking my head as I exhaled sharply. "And that's exactly why I stopped." Before Lauren could respond, before my mother could regain her composure and spit out whatever poison she was undoubtedly crafting in her mind, another voice broke through the silence, deep and calm, cutting through the tension like a blade. "You always did this, Carol," my father said, his voice carrying an authority I hadn't heard in years, a quiet finality that made everyone at the table freeze. "You made Emily your scapegoat so you wouldn't have to admit you failed Lauren." The words were like a slap across the face, not just to my mother, but to everyone in the room who had spent years watching her do exactly that without ever saying a word. My father, the man who had stayed silent through every argument, who had let my mother rule over our family like a tyrant, who had never once stood up for me when I needed him the most, was finally speaking the truth that had been buried beneath years of manipulation, years of shifting blame, years of making me feel like I was the problem when I had only ever been the one trying to survive. The shock on my mother's face was almost comical, her lips parting slightly as if she couldn't believe that, after all these years, the one person she had always expected to stay neutral had finally chosen a side, and it wasn't hers. For a long moment, nobody spoke, the weight of my father's words hanging heavy in the air, suffocating in its finality, settling over the table like an undeniable truth that none of them could escape from. My mother's face twisted into something between shock and rage, her mouth opening and closing as if she were trying to formulate some kind of defense, something to throw back at him, something that would shift the blame away from her and onto anyone else, the way she had always done. But there was nothing she could say, no quick retort, no cutting remark, no manipulation strong enough to rewrite the reality that had just been spoken out loud for the first time in our lives. Lauren sat frozen beside her, her fingers gripping the edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles had turned white, her eyes wide and glassy, darting between me and our father as if waiting for someone to tell her what to do. Waiting for someone to tell her how to fix this in a way that wouldn't require her to actually take responsibility for anything. She had never been forced to confront the side of our family before, had never been made to sit in the consequences of her own actions, had never been called out in such an undeniable way. And now, here she was, faced with the ugly truth of it all, unable to run from it, unable to shift it onto me, unable to pretend that she was just some innocent bystander in a situation she had helped create. My mother was the first to recover, her chair scraping against the floor as she pushed herself up, her expression tightening into something bitter and familiar, something I had seen 1,000 times before. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice low, shaking with fury as she turned to my father, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. "After all these years, after everything I've done to keep this family together, you sit there and accuse me of something like that? You think I failed Lauren? You think I made Emily the scapegoat?" My father, who had spent most of his life carefully avoiding confrontation, who had spent years choosing silence over standing up for me, simply sighed, running a hand over his face as if exhausted by all of this, as if he had been carrying these words for longer than I had even realized. "I don't think it," he said, his voice calm, even, but firm in a way that made it clear he wasn't going to back down. "I know it. And deep down, so do you." Lauren let out a choked sound, her breath hitching in a way that almost made me believe she was actually feeling the weight of all of this, actually beginning to understand the damage that had been done. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered, her voice thick with something that sounded dangerously close to regret, her wide, tear-filled eyes locked onto mine as if searching for some kind of reassurance. Some kind of sign that I would still be there for her despite everything. "Emily, I swear, I never meant for it to be like this. I thought you'd always be there. And that was the thing, wasn't it? That had always been the problem, always been the unspoken truth behind every single thing she had ever done, behind every favor she had asked for, behind every expectation she had placed on me without ever once thinking about what it cost me. She had never even considered that there would be a day when I wouldn't be there to pick up the pieces for her, never imagined a world where I wouldn't just quietly fix whatever disaster she had created. Never let herself believe that I was capable of walking away. Because in her mind, I had always just been there, always the safety net, always the one who made everything okay, always the one she could rely on when everything else fell apart. And maybe, for a long time, that had been true. But not anymore. I let out a slow breath, rolling my shoulders back as I took in the scene in front of me, my mother, still seething, still unable to accept any kind of responsibility for the way she had treated me. Still too wrapped up in her own sense of self-righteousness to even attempt to make things right. Lauren, crying, looking at me like she had just now realized that I wasn't an extension of herself, like she had just now understood that I was a person with limits, with breaking points, with the ability to walk away from something that had never served me. And my father, looking at me with something that almost resembled regret, as if he wished he had said something sooner, as if he wished he had been the one to stop all of this before it had gotten to this point. But it was too late for all of that now. I reached for my coat, my movements slow, deliberate, not rushed, not angry, just final. Lauren let out a small, broken sound, her fingers twitching like she wanted to reach for me, like she wanted to stop me, like she wanted to take it all back, but she didn't. Because she knew. She knew that there was no taking this back, no fixing it, no making it better with a few empty apologies and promises that things would change. She knew, maybe for the first time in her life, that this wasn't something I was going to forgive just because it was easier than fighting. I stepped away from the table, the weight on my shoulders feeling just a little lighter, my heartbeat steady, my mind clear, my steps unhurried as I made my way toward the door. I didn't look back. because for the first time in my life, I didn't need to.